All right, folks, it's 2 o'clock Eastern, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back to Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon. This session is 3-4, and it's alive. Animation techniques that bring to life SPFx and list formatting SharePoint solutions. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce David Warner and Hugo Bernier. Gentlemen, take it away.
All right, thank you, Russ. Well, we want to appreciate and thank everybody for coming today. Just some formalities, housekeeping we'll get out of the way first. As we know, SharePoint Conference was moved and subsequently renamed. So we're excited for the changes, not necessarily excited for the move, but we'll embrace it when we get to Vegas next year. So it's now known as the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference, and we all look forward to that experience and connecting back together in person. I know we all could use it. We want to go ahead and take some time to thank our sponsors. We know events like this are costly even if they are virtual, and so we want to appreciate the effort that they put in. Yeah, I know there's some virtual ways to go and visit them, so please take the time to do that. There's also a giveaway raffle. We've got some rules around it, but VR is becoming ever more popular now when we're all spending time at home trying to pretend we're not at home. So definitely enter the raffle there. There's some rules around it, but it's a fun opportunity to try to win a VR headset. And last but certainly not least, we have some charitable opportunities here with the GoFundMe charity and United Way. So we know that 10% of the sponsorships today are being donated as well. So we look forward to the community doing their part to help out the whole global pandemic that we're all dealing with today. My name is David Warner. If you know me, I appreciate you coming. If you don't, I look forward to collaborating more with you. As you can see, I'm a big sports fan, hockey, football, but an even bigger collaboration fan, community fan, love interacting with the community. So feel free to reach out on Twitter. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. As well as email and my blog, which is warner.digital. With me today is Hugo Bernier. Hugo, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hugo Bernier. I'm the world's laziest developer, and I'm proud of that. My Twitter and email is there. If you need to get a hold of me, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Like David, I'm a big fan of collaborating, and I am not a sports fan, but other than that, David and I are almost like brothers. David,
almost.
Almost.
Thank you, Hugo. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? Let's take a look at the agenda. As mentioned, the title is It's Alive, Animation Techniques that Bring to Life SharePoint Framework and list formatting SharePoint solutions. So we want to first start talking about the reasons for animation. Why should we care to put animations into our solution? Why should they be there? Are they useful? Are they gratuitous? What is the purpose? So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to take 3 sections to cover different ways and techniques in which you can put into practice the use of animation. So we're going to start with no-code techniques. It's a popular term nowadays. Low-code techniques, another popular term. But where do you go from there when you want to use a lot more code? Well, of course, MOE techniques. So we're going to see how to inject MOE code into our solutions to make animations come to life. And in the end, we've got a request to bring your creations to life. Now, we like to have a lot of fun. As you may see, Young Frankenstein is the theme for this today. We've got a little bit of a spin on it. We've injected ourselves in with Parker. A little help from Parker is the PNP mascot, Patterns and Practices mascot. We'll talk about that today. So ask some questions. We look to have fun with everybody. And we appreciate you guys coming. So that takes us to then our first question. We oftentimes hear this in the past. Can you make SharePoint not look like SharePoint? Now, SharePoint has had a rebirth with modern, and that certainly has made it look amazingly better in terms of an out-of-the-box experience. But it's also kind of ratcheted down all of the areas in which we can overtake and override some of the experience to provide our own custom experience on there. And so there are ways in which we can do it in a safe setting. We don't want to do it where we're just overwriting everything and anything on the page, but there are ways in which we can enhance the experience in a safe, repeatable, dependable way. So who can take advantage of these techniques? power users. So if you consider yourself a power user but not really a developer, perhaps you're a UI designer and you want to build something that can be beautifully put into real life in SharePoint, but you're not sure what it is that you can accomplish. Or if you're a SharePoint Framework developer, there's going to be something for you from anything in this session today. So I'm going to hand it over to Hugo, who's going to enter the topic on how animations enhance the user experience.
Thank you, David. So here's an example of a web part that's available out of the box on SharePoint, or SharePoint Online, which is the countdown web part. And you may notice that the countdown web part has a little animation here. And that animation actually conveys a lot of information. First of all, it brings your attention to the fact that there's something happening at a certain time. But the other thing that it does is actually, conveys information about, we're getting closer to that time. And it's going to stay at 1 second because I wanted to be able to talk longer. So this is not gratuitous animation. This is actually something that it's not taking over the screen, but it is bringing the user's attention to the fact that something is going to happen. And that's one example of where animation can be used. Animation doesn't have to be always in your face and take over the screen. In fact, most of the animations we're going to be talking about today are what's considered micro animations. They're usually tiny little animations that are often barely noticeable, but that help increase the user experience and introduce delight to our users. So what are some of the ways that you would want to use micro animations? Well, one of the ways is to illustrate that an action is being processed. Sometimes if you want to convey that your system is responsive and that it's actually, while it's doing stuff behind the scene, it's calling APIs or saving to a list or something, adding a little bit of animation will help convey that. And that's something you've probably seen before. This is an example of a hamburger menu where it's actually showing you, it's switching to a cross to say you can close this menu. Another way to use micro animations is to show that an operation is in progress, right? So that the user knows not only they've clicked on something and it has a result, had a result, but it's triggered something that's happening. Another way to use animations is to help the user understand and visualize how long the action will take. Kind of set that expectation. And it's interesting because even though your system can be sluggish or slow behind the scene, if there's an animation that keeps the user engaged, users will not really mind how long it takes. Now, there's certain guidelines in terms of how long they can wait and things like that, but we'll talk about those shortly. The other way that we can use microanimation is to focus the user's attention on crucial things. So the example of the countdown was an indication of there's something that's going to happen soon. But here we show another example here where we're trying to convey to the user that something's going to happen or something's happening and you should pay attention to it. One other way is to kind of make the interactions feel a bit more natural. You'll notice this is a great animation that I found online, but you'll notice when they're dragging the things around, there's a little shift that's happening. The things are moving around, the bars are kind of skewing a little bit because this is probably closer to what you would experience in real life if you were moving stuff around. Now, we're not trying to introduce skeuomorphism or things like that where we're trying to pretend that we're in real life. But adding these effects that make people feel that this thing is behaving more like a real object helps introducing that sense of comfort. If it's natural for me to think that when I move something on the screen that it will move the item, it makes that user interface a lot more intuitive, and that's what we're trying to do here. Probably the last reason is to make things a little bit more exciting. And, again, we have to be careful about how much animation and how many things we do, because when everything's exciting, nothing is exciting. But this is one example here of how we do this. So the problem we're trying to solve here is, well, my page is boring. How do I improve it, right? How do I make people excited about this announcement we're putting in SharePoint or things like that? So what are some of the guidelines? If you're building an app and you're adding animations and you're doing things like that, you don't want an angry mob with pitchforks and flames wanting to attack you because they're unhappy with you. So what are some of the things we want to do? Well, the first thing to consider is the frequency, because if you do an animation that repeats over and over again and it's everywhere in your system, people are at first they're going to be delighted, right? But then gradually they're going to be less and less excited, less and less, it's going to be less and less novel and delightful, and eventually it becomes something that annoys them. So when we're talking about micro animations, it's important here. Like, it can't take over, it can't even delay the system, but you can use micro animations to make the system feel like it is more responsive. Speaking of delays, let's consider durations. When we do animations, well, let's zoom in a little bit on what a second would be on the system. So this is a second, and compared to to that scale, anything that happens below 100 milliseconds appears to be instant. But if you do something between 150 milliseconds to 350 milliseconds, that's the amount of time that it takes for users to realize that there's something going on. So that's the time that it takes for them to comprehend. You may or may not have noticed earlier that we had a little lightning animation on our screen, and we actually made it less than 150 milliseconds, or we made it 150 milliseconds. So some of you may not have even noticed that we had lightning on the screen. So the reason why that's important is because you want to be able to do something that users will notice. So anything between 200 milliseconds and 500 milliseconds is the animation sweet spot. And speed is actually important. If you do an animation, even though your system is not slow, if you do an animation that takes longer than 500 milliseconds, it can actually cause the users to perceive your system as sluggish and slower. So if you need to do an animation that will last longer than 500 milliseconds, you might have to consider repeating that animation for the duration, right? Again, we got to be careful, because if something repeats too long, that animation becomes annoying, and people are not delighted as much. So slower animations will definitely make people think that the system is slow. But we use animations as a way to hide delays and keep the users engaged. One example of this is if you look at Facebook. Facebook has a little skeleton animation when it loads content. It's barely noticeable, but it's actually loading what looks like shades of text before the actual text appears. And it just makes the system look faster. And there's a study that was made by Viget that say that people would wait longer for branded animations that are that look like they belong to the system versus some generic animations. The other thing to consider, though, is accessibility. For those of you who have iPhones and had iOS 7, there's a lot of people that turned off the parallax effect because seeing something move at a different speed behind, like in the background than the foreground, can actually cause people to feel seasick. As a rule, you want your animations to always be triggered by an action that the user does. And that action might just be entering the page or mousing over something, but try to avoid animations that just randomly happen, because they can actually make people, they can catch people off guard, and it might make people feel sick. We also have to consider, when it comes to accessibility, we also have to consider that not every person is able to going to perceive that animation. For cognitive disabilities, so what we can do with that is make sure that when you do an animation, that it's not the only way to convey information, right? So make sure that people are able to see the animation without, the information without the animation as well. And probably what we want to avoid is avoid building websites like this. Now, I love this website. This is a real website, but you can see pretty much all the concepts we've talked about are like, this is the anti-patterns. There's so much stuff going on to the screen that it makes it impossible to keep track of what to look at, but I still love this site. So, and today we're going to, in our lab kit, we're going to use some tools to do our experiments. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to use a SharePoint site and lists. And then we're going to use some web parts that are available for free. One is the enhanced list formatting web part, which is a web part that David and I built and we made available to the community. Another one is a modern content query web part, which if you've used SharePoint in the past, you've probably used a content query web part. There is now a modern version of it that was recently updated, and then Visual Studio Code. And with that, I will give the helm to David. David.
Thank you, Hugo. Excellent. So we're going to start out with no-code techniques. So what exactly is no-code techniques, right? When we think of no-code and you equate it to something like SharePoint or any web experience, it's kind of a lie, right? There's always code involved. When you talk about animation, there always will be code involved. From our perspective, though, we're looking at no-code techniques as something that you can copy and paste. So you may not be comfortable necessarily with writing your own code, but you know what? We're all kind of used to and comfortable with taking something someone else has created and using it as a guide or a model. And so that's the concept with this section. We want you to be comfortable, even if you don't like the look of curly braces and you need that little barf bag that Hugo had on one of his previous slides when you start thinking of writing code. Not to worry. This is the section for you. It's going to be as easy as Control-C, Control-V, and that's what we want you to gain. So what is the lab kit then for the no-code experience? We're going to be using the SharePoint list web part. This is an out-of-the-box web part. We're going to be using the enhanced list formatting web part, and we'll see how to add that to a page, and we'll see what you can do with it. Essentially, it allows you to override the CSS on a page, but there's some guidelines that you want to follow, so we want to make sure that we take note of those. Well, what are the demo applications for this specific kind of no-code experience? In this demo, we're going to be focusing on list formatting. Okay, so we're going to see how to combine the list web part, the enhanced list formatting web part, and list formatting together to take care of what can be a great, better experience on a SharePoint page. All right, so we got our monster ready. He's on the stage. He's dressed up. Let's see what the no-code experience can look like. What you're seeing on the screen is a SharePoint list. If you look here at the address bar, you can see we are in a list called community contributors, and we've applied a list formatting definition. So what we're seeing is just a Polaroid effect that's designed these photos and community contributors to just look like they've been put onto a Polaroid photo. The drop shadow, these are all things that can be done with list formatting out of the box, no extra stuff required, right? Still pretty cool in and of itself. Now, if we put that on a page, what we've done here is I've moved over to a page and I've just taken the out-of-the-box list web part. That's all this is here. If I edit the web part, we see I'm pointing at my list right there, right? I'm pointing at a view in which I've got a list formatting definition or a view formatting definition applied. And so we see it in the experience that we would expect, like we just saw in the list. What we're going to do, though, is we're going to add that list formatting, enhanced list formatting web part. Now, what we're not going to do in the course of these demos is we're not going to dig too much into the code that makes all of the animations possible. There is tons of blogs. What we want you to get from this experience is how easy it is to go apply things that you're able to find elsewhere and utilize. And we'll ramp that up as we go through the no, low, mo format here within the session. But we're not going to dive too much in because we want you to just be able to mentally marinate on what's possible. And we want to fill the experience with what's possible instead of how we accomplish each. We can show you anytime you'd like how to accomplish each one of these. Now, this is an enhanced list formatting web part. As you can see, there's some terms and conditions that we put in here because it is a powerful web part. It is based on the Spider-Man principle. Great power comes great responsibility. You can use this web part to inject styles onto your page and override any of the HTML. And should you do that? Should you override any of the HTML? No. You should override the HTML that you own. But because the list formatting definition within the list web part is based upon HTML that we created, and theoretically and technically we own, we know it won't change. We don't want to go overwriting things on the page that we don't own because Microsoft can change them at any time. And none of us want broken styles. None of us want someone calling us, asking us why SharePoint is broken. None of us want tears or nightmares or blue screens of death, all of the things which will come if you use this web part for evil. But you can be the superhero in your organization. So we're going to go ahead and hit accept. And we're going to go ahead and select add custom styles. We see that the pop out has occurred here. Now what this allows us to do is to just simply inject some custom CSS, and we can do it here in the little window. We can go ahead and click the pop out, which gives us a bigger window in with which we can work. Now I've already got some styles that we're going to go ahead and inject in there. I've got them off screen here, so we'll just copy and paste them. And again, we're not going to get too deep into the actual styles here. We just want to see what it is that we can do. So immediately you may have seen there's a little shift that occurred. We've kind of off-tilted or off-kiltered the Polaroids to make them look like they've kind of been thrown onto the page, right? I've also injected a hover state. So now when I interact with this, assuming we had published, I click on it to assume the content here, focus on the content. And as I hover over each one of these, it kind of brings to the forefront that experience. So now we're getting this little micro animation. We know we're making a definitive decision to move our cursor over the individual Polaroid, and that just kind of brings it a little closer to our eyes for us to examine. But wait, there's more. Perhaps we want to change that experience so that it pops just a little bit more. Well, we're going to go back up to our web part here, and we're going to replace some more CSS. And this is, again, all we're doing is changing the CSS. There's no JavaScript here. This is simply copying and pasting CSS. And now you see that the off-kilter, the scattered look is still there, but we've moved everything over to use black and white on load, kind of like our Young Frankenstein experience, right? It's vintage, it looks nice. You may have noticed as well that we changed the font here. We were able to change the font that looks a little bit more like a handwriting there on the Polaroid, which is a little more natural to real life. And now when I invoke this and hover over it, well, we're really making that experience pop, because now we're able to bring the focus to what I decided to hover over even more, right? We can see these community contributors. Leo is black and white to begin with. He's straight up vintage all the time. He's awesome. But we can see that we're able to really make that experience pop. Again, this is all just CSS. It's not gratuitous, right? There's a very specific reason why we're doing each one of these things. And therefore, it is invoked by the user. It's not something that they're having thrust upon them. All right, let's take one more look at a no-code change we can make. So we'll scroll up and we'll select change styles, go ahead and select all and replace, and click in here to invoke the styles, and we see one more change has occurred. So we still see it's black and white. We still see our custom font makes it look like something had been handwritten on our Polaroid. We're still able to hover over it, but now you notice that little heart has occurred, right? And so with it comes the ability to animate. So what if we had this linked to a hyperlink behind the scenes that went in and set some sort of favorite mechanism on each one of our community contributors here? You can now, in effect, override that experience for just having a simple heart. And all that is, again, I'm kind of going over and over here because I know that sometimes the streaming kind of breaks up the animation a little bit. All that is a hover state. using a CSS sprite. So again, all these things have been done with just simply copying and pasting some CSS. It really is a true no-code experience. So you're able to take advantage of creating this experience on a SharePoint page. A lot of people see list formatting as a fantastic way of displaying list data, but when they're building web parts or building experiences and solutions within SharePoint, you're not really sending people to a list to consume data. The list is really there behind the scenes to be able to store the data and edit the data and author the data. But what you really want to do is you want to combine multiple lists for a full solution experience. And with the out-of-the-box list web part that inherits all of that list formatting that you've created, we're able to create a true, what appears to be a completely custom web part. And you combine that with the list formatting enhancer web part, and you've got a truly custom experience here that could be combined with other list formatting experiences to enhance the solution and the experience there, just using small micro animations. All right, let's go ahead and jump back into our slides. Some resources for you. The PNP list formatting samples. This is a PNP repository here that you can go to get all kinds of list formatting definitions that you can utilize. And guess what? They're all free. They're all maintained and they're all contributed to by the community. So if you create something that's amazing, you can contribute it, and we would love to see you do that. In fact, Hugo and I would love to help you do that. So if you have an idea or one that you've created and you'd like to submit it, reach out to us. We'll help you make it happen. The other resource here is our list formatting enhancer web part. That's the one that's specifically there for being able to inject the custom styles and the CSS onto your page to add those pseudo experiences, those animated experiences to your list formatting web part. Right. Low code techniques. What exactly is low code? Interactive user-driven triggers, right? So think about click events. We're going to step it up a little bit now because we're not looking to just simply copy and paste. We're going to take advantage of things like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But we're not looking to utilize SPFx here quite yet. So if you're comfortable writing CSS, writing HTML, writing some small amount of JavaScript, then you're going to be absolutely comfortable in the low-code techniques. What does our lab kit include? We're going to use the modern content query web part. Hugo had referenced this early on when we talked about our session lab kit. This is, again, a freely available web part that is reminiscent and built upon the benefits that you got in the classic content query web part, but with a modern spin and a much more powerful one at that. We're still going to capture list data, so we're going to take advantage of the list data, the same list data, that community contributor list. We're going to take and continue to use the content that is available there. So these two things are what would make up your lab kit for this set of demos. The application areas. Well, if we want to create interactive web parts using list data with CSS JavaScript. So again, it's like the list formatting experience when you combine it with the list web part. But in this case, we're going to step it up a notch because we're going to be able to take advantage of associating JavaScript to our HTML output. So we can do things like click events and other related events associated to your HTML that you can control. All right, so our monster has been dressed up. He's ready. He's starting to dance a little bit. So let's see what those low code techniques look like in living color. All right. Now, let me go ahead and edit this page and set the stage for what we have here. This is using that content query web part, right? So I'm going to go ahead and edit that, and we're going to see right here over on the panel, there is a collection of, if you've ever used the content query web part in the past, some very familiar settings that we're able to set and configure, right? So what's cool about the modern content query web part is it's actually cross-site collection compatible, right? So I can actually change the site within my site tenant that I want it to point to. I can identify the web URL and the list that it's using. We can do some of the very typical configurations that we had in Classic that we used and was very easy to teach to other content authors and page creators. Filter, right? So we can sort, we can filter, and we can add filters and do all of that. Then we specify the view fields that we want to use, right? So we're able to come through here and identify the fields. In this case, we're utilizing the ID, the picture, the title to display this information. Now, the things that really make this unique is that we're able to edit what's called a handlebar template. Now, if you're not familiar with handlebar templates, don't get afraid. It's pretty much HTML, and they do have some uniqueness to them, but they're extremely empowering. And what it looks like when you build this and select these things, behind the scenes, it creates this handlebar template for us. Now, we're not using that, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but it builds this handlebar template for us, and that's what gets displayed when you first drop this web part onto a page and start adding fields to display. And this is always available to you, but the power comes when you're able to identify your own custom template, right? And that's what we're doing here. We're displaying a custom template, and then you can add external scripts. So in this case, we're identifying that HTML, and then we're adding some external scripts to be available to us. All right, so jQuery, there's better things to use, but there's probably the most popular, so we're including it as the sample. And then we've got another JavaScript file here that we're able to access to further support our web part. Now, what all does this do? Well, it allows us to control the exact HTML output of our solution. And again, I'm not going to go deep into the code that drives all of this because we want you to be able to just consume the benefits that you get by using these. We can show you the code another time or one-on-one if you'd like to reach out to us. But I will just kind of show you what that looks like real briefly. Here, we've got that handlebar template stored within our style library in a couple of subfolders, but all it really is an HTML file, right? Some CSS we see that drives a lot of that there, and then our HTML that creates that Polaroid experience, right? So that's what's driving. There's no magic going on behind the scenes or anything like that. It is just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I'm going to go ahead and republish my page. Now, you may have noticed when the page loaded, there was a slight animation on the names. So I'm going to refresh a couple of times just so you can pay attention to that. Notice how they fade in, right? So we still have that experience of hovering over and seeing the color, so we get that pop. But when I load the page again, I'll refresh it, pay attention there. We see that those names fade into or kind of come into existence there when it loads. We've got that same experience that we had in list formatting, but what makes it different this time? Well, that little heartbeat. Now we see it does that, right? I can still hover over, but now I can click on it, go back, and what's happening? I've used jQuery to create a simple click event. You could do that with plain JavaScript as well, and we've associated a class to this particular HTML element that then puts into a loop the heartbeat. So I know, hey, I've favorited Katie. She's an awesome designer, part of the lookbook design team for SharePoint. I love her. In fact, I'm going to heart everybody, right? But you wouldn't want to necessarily do that. And as Hugo had mentioned, you don't always want to have something going in infinite, right? I'm leaving this on an infinite loop just for purposes of the demo because I know that the latency of the screencast sometimes doesn't show it. So if I only showed it 2 or 3 times, you may not see it. But what we did here is we simply just associated a click event to these, right? A very small, simple little JavaScript event that adds that class. And then based on the class, it associates the class existence, it associates an animation loop of what it looks like a pulsating heart.
So
now
David,
you may be,
David,
yep.
I ask you, how many lines of code is that?
Oh, let's see. JavaScript and CSS included?
Or just JavaScript?
Oh, I don't know, maybe like 2. Maybe like 2. In fact, you could make it one long one, really, but it's a very, very simple thing. Very simple. Even if you're using vanilla JavaScript, it's a very simple thing to do. But Hugo brings up a good point, because what if we still wanted to do more with less, right? The whole concept of low code is, well, could we do more with less? Do we have to use JavaScript to invoke some of these things? We know that just by hovering over, we're changing the color and kind of raising it off the screen. But what if we wanted to show more information about each one of these persons and we didn't want to necessarily display or have to rely on a click event? Well, you can do that as well. So here we are on a low code 2 sample. Now everything we see is the same, but watch what happens when I hover over the Polaroid. Did you notice that? It kind of does a little zoom effect, almost like a little zoom parallax effect, if you will, on the photo. And as it zooms in, it replaces it with a little information card, right? So I could add some additional information here about Katie or Bo or Hugo or any one of us. And as we hover over, we can have the opportunity to follow them on Twitter. And we can even still invoke our little heartbeat. So now I've hovered off, it goes back to normal, and I see the heartbeat taking place there, combining that. That is 0 JavaScript, by the way. 0 JavaScript, because I created it to use the hover effect. Could we use a click event instead of a hover effect, right? Could we change this to, well, it's not going to show that information card until we actually click on the picture? Absolutely. But what we wanted to convey here was that you don't have to. If you just simply wanted to become really good at CSS, you are incredibly empowered to be able to do all kinds of animation using nothing more than CSS and HTML. Extremely, extremely powerful.
Now, David, behind the scenes, we could have also made some changes to the data to store, you know, that you favorited Katie, for example. But in this example, we didn't do this. But like the effect that we're showing now is just for show right now. But in real life, you would want it to connect to and to do something real, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that next time we come and load this page, maybe that heartbeat is loaded on default. Might not again be in infinite. You may only load it once or twice, or let it beat once or twice. But you might still leave it red on default, so you know the difference between who's been favorited and who's not, or who you're following perhaps and who you're not. So while we're just displaying it here for the purposes of the demo, there's a lot more that you can do to connect this using even more code if you wanted. And that might be left to someone else to do that job, right? You as maybe a UI developer might be the one responsible for creating the interface, but someone else is going to wire up all of that code in the back end, and that's okay too. You are incredibly empowered to be able to do all of this using these free tools.
And essentially, what we're doing with the code here is we have two CSS classes, one that has the heart beating and one that has the gray heart. And when you click on the heart, it actually just changes the class name for that element to say this is now a favorited person versus a non-favorited person.
Exactly. Yeah, that's all we're doing for the heart. For the parallax effect that we see there and the information card, that's simply just using a hover state. So it's pure CSS. And we're just changing the animation that occurs and the display properties of the picture versus the information card when we hover over the particular community contributor. All right, excellent. So let's jump back into our slides and let's just again review the low-code resources that we're taking advantage of. The PNP Modern Content Query web part. Again, free for use here, built by the community for the community. The resources that we used for animation, a fantastic resource, and there's many of them out there. One is called Animista.net. Now, this is the ability to go in and just simply build an animation, copy and paste the CSS, and away you go. It's incredibly powerful. And if we have time near the end of this, we might show a demo, but take a look at it. There's lots of other resources like that for you to take advantage of. All right, next up, Hugo.
Sorry, I took over the animation on the wrong slide, so I will fix that for you.
Ah, okay. Nope, you were right, I think. There you go.
That's
Perfect.
the one
Okay.
we're talking about.
Yeah, no problem. So SPFx web parts, check out that URL to find the content query and many other provided by the PNP community. And then again, you can check out that Animista. It's an awesome site if you'd like to just play with some CSS-based animations, see what they look like, and do some copy and paste capability. Next up is MOE Code. Going to step it up a notch, and Hugo is going to lead that.
All right. Now, I mean, we're saying MOE Code here, but we don't want to scare anyone. We're not trying to make this a coding session. What we've showed you so far is we've been using mostly, the list formatting functionality. We've added some web parts, and we've used either some very basic CSS or some basic JavaScript. Right, so what are we talking about? We're talking about MOE Code. Well, MOE Code really could involve creating a new custom web part. It could also use some advanced animation frameworks. There are lots of libraries out there that you can embed either as modules or JavaScript libraries, that will actually build a lot of animations. That's actually one of the things that we'll be showing you today. But you could also have physics-driven animation. One of the things we talked about earlier is, if you can make things behave more naturally, it makes the users feel that the system is behaving in a way they expect. And it introduces delight, but it also introduces trust in that promise that object gives. So far, a lot of the code that we've shown you was really samples that David and I found. We were surfing the web really late one night, found some cool samples with basic CSS or basic JavaScript, and we just embedded that. When we start talking about the MOE Code, we start having to introduce a bit more expertise. Not too much. Let's face it, if I can do it, it's pretty straightforward. So what are we going to do? We're going to continue using our modern content query web part, just because we didn't want to make this a session about creating SharePoint Framework web parts. But we could have absolutely used the code I'm going to be showing you in a custom web part. We're also going to use an animation framework library. One of them that we like is GreenSock. There's lots of other out there. The particular demo that we found that we wanted to use was already done for us. So what are some of the areas where we could use this? Well, it's really about leveraging animation frameworks to enhance more mundane tasks. So let's do a little demo. So now, our monster is not only doing fancy stuff, but he's starting to tap dance and starting to impress people. Let's switch. So what we did here is we went, and I think this is a library that David introduced me to, something called GreenSock. Again, there's tons of other libraries out there that are available where they build a lot of animations. And this screen has been sitting there for a while, so all the animations are done. But you see here, everything that they're doing is actually built using CSS and JavaScript. So this is, they're using SVG, and they're using all sorts of fun stuff in that. But you can actually build, motion paths to animate things over a certain destination, and you can do other things like this. I want to make it clear that we're not sponsored by GreenSock. It's just a library that we're fans of, and if we had more time, we would have been showing a lot more libraries like this. Again, if you want to find out more, or if you need to build an animation, you need some help as to where to get started, please reach out to David and I, and we'll share with you some of the libraries we found out there. So when we were doing our research, we found this cool demo from GreenSock, which is just a draggable grid. We wanted to keep the same demo of having favorite people in the community, but the ability to drag. So let me just start by showing you what it does. When I move stuff around, it kind of behaves like what you would expect things to do when you drag them in a certain order. So imagine if we're trying to look for a real business case here, business application. Imagine if we had, let's say we're managing a queue for help desk people or something like that, and we wanted to be able to change the order in which people will appear. We would use something like this, where we'd have the names of the people, or maybe this is the the order in which we want fields to appear, or something like this. But the way this is done, if you look at they've got some stuff here to show these options, but the bulk of it is really this list here, which is empty. And then they have some CSS that they use to make things look pretty, and some JavaScript. Now the JavaScript is a bit more involved, and it's calling the GreenSock animation library called draggable, which automatically enables the dragging. But everything else is done in this code here. So that when they load, they actually populate the library, they create the individual tiles, and then they make it sortable. The one thing that it's not doing here, and we're not doing this in our demo, is it's not saving back anywhere. It's just remembering that you changed the order of things here. In real life, we would probably want our code to actually go and save things. So what I did is I just stole their code. We basically copied the sample. We started with the sample that we had, which was our Polaroid sample, and then we added the code that they had in their sample, which is the list and the tiles. And then we added the little rotating by certain degrees, and we do this so it looks random, but it's every so many images rotates by different degrees. And then we have our blank list. And then in our JavaScript, we're actually using the same JavaScript that they have, except what we had to do is we had to customize it a little bit, because this is happening within a handlebar template. So we're actually storing things at the window level as opposed to global variables in JavaScript. But what we do is we go through the list, and this is the exact same code that you saw, or most of the same code as you saw, is what we do, except is we insert our own elements. We insert the photos and the divs. And if I show you what it looks like, I hope that people want to see what it looks like. It should look like something like this. Again, it's pretty much the same thing, except that if I want to group these people by my favorites, I can just do this here, right? Well, I'm definitely not my favorite. Let's move people around like this. There you go. David, I guess I'll put you early because you're helping with this presentation. I love Katie. So this is just a very simple concept. But again, hopefully, what we've shown so far is we've shown a progression of using data that we have in SharePoint, and not breaking SharePoint, not painting, not going outside the lines here, where all the HTML that's inside this list is HTML that we own. This could have been a business app, not just a list. It could have been, we could have been presenting data. What we wanted to do was introducing a bit of rich interaction. And believe me, we could have done so many more demos in so many other areas. We just didn't want to reintroduce new demos every time. And the only thing that's here that's not production ready is in real life, we would probably want to save. When I change this order, we'd probably want to save here. Now we could probably just go to the list and have a sort order, or maybe we want each person to have their favorite list of people and rank them by order of preference. Let's go back to the presentation, because I think we're almost out of time, right, David?
We are pretty close. We got about 2 minutes.
All right. So the resources that we use the same modern content query web part. Again, we could have built custom code in SharePoint Framework. We could have just copied the code that we did in our thing, and we wouldn't have had to use handlebars. We used GreenSock. We also borrowed some styles for the Polaroid look and feel from another article. It's actually in our presentation. If you need to have those, let us know. So some of the resources that we use for these animation techniques, again, we use the list formatting extensively. Our good friend Chris Kent is the list formatting whisperer. I swear he sees the world in terms of list formatting.
And horses.
And horses, yeah. It's like he sees the Matrix. And we also have the SharePoint web parts sample gallery, which you can find tons of samples you can use. We used 2 web parts from that sample gallery. Some of the other resources we used Animista for just inspiration for just copy and paste of CSS animations, and Greenstock as one of the libraries. Now, Greenstock, I should point out, is a library that normally you have to pay for to buy. Or to, well, I guess you always have to pay for it to buy something, but it's you have to pay for it to use. But there are other libraries out there.
There is a free version of it too. It's just they've got more advanced features, like some physics-based features that you could utilize that are pretty cool.
I would have loved that. So, well, that's pretty much it for us. Thank you, everyone. Again, here's our contact information. David, I don't know if you wanted to leave us with one last word.
Abby North. No, thank you all for attending. Feel free to reach out to either or both of us, and if you can do that at the same time, we'll be even more amazed. But don't hesitate to let us know if you have any questions. We really are passionate about this kind of stuff, and would love to work together with anybody else in the community.
I'll stop sharing so we can look for questions, but and if there's questions, we'll stick around for a little bit more time. But thank you, everyone.